He wasn't looking at my mother-in-law. He wasn't scanning the room for the hostess or the caterers or any of the well-dressed guests who had been competing quietly for his attention all evening. Dr. Conrad Ashby, chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Johns Hopkins, the man my mother-in-law had spent 6 months trying to get through the door of her fundraiser, was looking directly at me. And I was standing next to a tray of untouched canapes, wearing a dress my husband had picked out because mine was too plain for this crowd. Holding a glass of white wine I hadn't touched, wondering how quickly I could disappear into the kitchen without anyone noticing. I wasn't supposed to matter that night. I want to tell you about the dinner first. About the way my mother-in-law set the table. 12 place settings, the good china, the crystal she'd inherited from her own mother, the kind of silverware that requires a specific drawer and a specific cloth and a specific amount of reverence. I want to tell you about how she introduced everyone who walked through that door, the way she lingered on their credentials like she was reading from a program. This is Judge Holloway. This is Senator Marsh's former chief of staff. This is Dr. Conrad Ashby, who just returned from presenting at the World Heart Conference in Vienna. And then there was me. And this, she said, when it was my turn, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, is Wren, Preston's wife. She works at the hospital, actually. In administration, I think. I work at the hospital. In administration, I think. My name is Wren Calloway. I'm 38 years old. I have 2 board certifications, a fellowship I completed at Mayo Clinic, and a publication record that takes up 3 pages of a CV I've never once been asked to share in that house. But in my mother-in-law's world, I was Preston's wife. The girl from Dayton who'd somehow ended up at the right medical school at the right time and caught the attention of her son, who was, as she reminded anyone who would listen, the real doctor in the family. Preston is an orthopedic surgeon. A good one, actually. I've never once disputed that. But that's not the story I'm here to tell you. I'm here to tell you about the night Gwendolyn Calloway decided to make her feelings about me clear in front of 23 people, a 3-course dinner, and the one man in the room who knew exactly who I was. Preston and I had been married for 9 years when his mother organized what she called a legacy dinner. That was her phrase, legacy dinner. Like they were planning a new wing of a building instead of a Saturday night in Chevy Chase. The purpose, as far as I understood it, was to bring together the people Gwendolyn considered important to the family's future. Donors. Physicians. A few politicians. The kind of crowd that makes them feel smaller even when the room is large. My mother-in-law is Gwendolyn Calloway. She is 71, a former concert pianist who gave up her career to raise Preston and his younger sister, Ainsley, and has spent the last 40 years deciding that this sacrifice entitled her to a level of influence over their lives that most people would find suffocating. She is elegant. She is formidable. She donates generously to the right causes and knows how to make a room feel like it owes her something. She has never liked me. I knew this by the end of the first Thanksgiving. Not from anything she said outright. Gwendolyn Calloway doesn't do outright. She does implication. She does the pause before the compliment. She does the question that sounds like curiosity but is actually measurement. Dayton, how interesting. And your parents, what do they do? My father drove a bus for the county transit system for 31 years. My mother worked the front desk at a pediatric clinic. I am not ashamed of either of those things. But in Gwendolyn's dining room, surrounded by the children of physicians and the grandchildren of senators, I learned very early that some rooms keep a ledger, and my family's name was not in it. Preston never saw it. That's the thing about growing up inside a dynamic. You stop being able to see it from the outside. She's warming up to you, he'd say. She just takes time. 9 years. She took 9 years and she still introduced me as Preston's wife. In administration, I think. The night of the legacy dinner started badly and moved sideways from there. I was running late because I had a patient, not an administrative patient, an actual patient. A 64-year-old woman named Doris, who had come through my office 3 weeks earlier, with symptoms that had been written off twice by 2 other physicians, and who turned out to have a cardiac arrhythmia that required immediate attention. I'm an electrophysiologist. My job is to find the electrical problems in people's hearts. I've been doing it for 11 years. But you wouldn't know that from the way Gwendolyn said administration. I walked in 20 minutes late. Gwendolyn looked at her watch. Not at me, at her watch. Then she looked at Preston with an expression that said what she didn't say out loud. Wren, she said. We've already started the first course. I'll have Gerald set a place. I'm sorry, I said. I had a patient. Of course you did. A smile. Come in, come in. The table was already in full conversation by the time I sat down. I was placed at the far end, between Ainsley, my sister-in-law, who is polite but distant in the way that people are when they've been told a version of you that they've never thought to question. And a man I didn't recognize who turned out to be the husband of one of Gwendolyn's foundation board members. He spent most of the first course telling me about his boat. Dr. Ashby arrived late. Later than me, actually, which I noticed because Gwendolyn's watch came out again and then went smoothly back into the same smile she deployed for everyone who mattered. "Conrad," she said, standing to greet him. "We're so honored." Dr. Conrad Ashby is 63. He has the kind of face that doesn't invite small talk, sharp, attentive, the kind of eyes that are always doing a second calculation behind whatever conversation is happening on the surface. He's published over 200 papers. He rebuilt the cardiac surgery program at 3 separate institutions over a 30-year career. He was the keynote speaker at the conference in Vienna that Gwendolyn had mentioned. He was also, though no one at that table knew it, a man I had worked alongside for 2 weeks at a joint symposium in Baltimore 7 months earlier. 2 weeks of long days and late nights and the specific kind of professional intimacy that comes from solving hard problems with someone in a short window of time. He didn't see me right away. The table was long and I was at the end of it, and Gwendolyn was steering him toward the seat of honor at the opposite end, next to Preston, next to herself. I watched him settle in. I watched her begin the performance of seating and introductions that she did so well. I watched Preston lean forward in that way he had when he was trying to impress someone, animated in a way he wasn't always in our own kitchen. I went back to the man and his boat. It was during the second course that it happened. The conversation had shifted to the foundation. Gwendolyn's foundation, which funds cardiac research and bears the Callaway name, and which she has chaired for 14 years. Dr. Ashby was asking questions, genuine ones, and Gwendolyn was in her element, precise and passionate in equal measure. I'll give her this. She cares about the work. The fundraising is real. The outcomes she cited were real. She is not a vain woman who simply wants her name on a building. She genuinely believes in what she does. She just also happens to believe that I don't belong at her table. "We've been fortunate to build relationships with some exceptional physicians," she was saying. "Preston, of course, is leading our orthopedic research initiative. And we've had wonderful support from the cardiology department at Georgetown." A pause. "Ren, actually, works adjacent to that world. Don't you, Ren?" Every face at the table turned toward me. Adjacent to that world. Like I was a receptionist standing near a window. "Gwendolyn," I said carefully, "I'm a physician." Of course, she waved a hand. "I just mean in terms of the foundation's work. You're more on the procedural side, aren't you?" "I'm an electrophysiologist," I said. "I perform catheter ablations, I implant pacemakers and defibrillators, I manage complex arrhythmia cases." I kept my voice level. I kept my hands in my lap. "It's cardiology." She smiled. "Well, we're very proud of all the work being done." The table moved on. Ainsley looked at her plate. Preston cleared his throat and said something to the man on his left. The boat husband beside me refilled his own wine glass, and that might have been the end of it. That might have been the moment I let pass, the way I had let 100 moments pass before it. Because that is what you do when you love someone and their family is a condition of that love, and you have decided, over and over again, that the relationship is worth the cost. But Gwendolyn wasn't finished. "You know," she said, her voice light, conversational, the voice she used when she was about to say something that required deniability. "It's funny, Ren has always been more comfortable behind the scenes. Some people are just built for support roles. It's nothing to be ashamed of." The table was quiet. I looked at my plate. I heard Preston start to say something, and then I heard a chair. Not the scrape of someone shifting position, the deliberate sound of someone pushing back from the table with intention. I looked up. Dr. Ashby had set down his fork. He was looking at me, not at Gwendolyn, not at Preston, at me. With an expression I recognized, the expression of someone recalibrating, fitting a piece of information into a framework that had just shifted. "I'm sorry," he said. "Ren Callaway?" I nodded. "Dr. Ren Callaway, from the Arrhythmia Symposium in Baltimore, 7 months ago." "Yes," I said. He looked at Gwendolyn. He looked at her the way I imagine he looks at a diagnosis that surprises him. "Dr. Callaway," he said, and the title landed on the table like something solid, presented the most significant case study of that entire symposium. She identified a pattern in post-ablation electrical recovery that 3 of us had been chasing for 2 years. We've since incorporated her framework into our department's protocol at Johns Hopkins. Nobody moved. Gwendolyn's smile had gone very still. "I apologize, Doctor." Ashby continued, and his voice was perfectly even, perfectly professional, the kind of even that is more devastating than anger. "I wasn't aware that Dr. Callaway was a member of this family. Had I known, I would have reached out directly much sooner. He looked at Preston. Your wife is one of the most rigorous clinical minds I encountered all year. I did not look at my mother-in-law. I looked at the tablecloth. I looked at the crystal. I looked at the silverware that required a specific cloth and a specific amount of reverence. I breathed. The remainder of dinner was a study in what happens to a room when the architecture of it changes without warning. Gwendolyn recovered. She always recovers. But there was something different in the recovery. A quality of caution that hadn't been there before. She asked Dr. Ashby questions about the symposium. She expressed interest in my work with a warmth that was carefully calibrated, like someone adjusting a thermostat by single degrees. Preston didn't say anything for a long time. After dinner, while guests circulated near the fireplace and someone played the piano that had been Gwendolyn's before she gave up performing, my husband found me near the window. You never told me about Baltimore, he said. You never asked. He was quiet. He had the look of someone doing math they don't like. I didn't know Conrad Ashby even knew your work. I know. She didn't know, Wren. She didn't know who he was to you professionally. I looked at him. I wanted to say, that's not the point, Preston. The point isn't whether she knew. The point is what she said when she didn't know. The point is what she says every time no one she respects is in the room. But I'd learned 9 years in that some conversations don't land the way you need them to land on the night they happen. Some conversations need space, need time, need the other person to sit with something uncomfortable before they can actually hear you. So I said, I know she didn't know. That's the part I need you to think about. He did think about it. I could see him thinking about it. And that, I realized, was something. Not everything, but something. Dr. Ashby found me before he left. He was putting on his coat in the foyer, and I was coming down the stairs from the powder room on the second floor, and we nearly collided at the bottom step in the way that feels, in retrospect, like the kind of symmetry that doesn't happen on accident. Dr. Calloway, he said. Please, I said. Wren? He nodded. I wanted to apologize. I looked at him. You don't have anything to apologize for. I do, he said. I should have greeted you properly when I arrived. I didn't see you at the table until he stopped. I should have been more observant. You were seated 40 feet away from me. Still. He put on his other glove. For what it's worth, the work you presented in Baltimore was exceptional. I meant that. It wasn't. I wasn't saying it for effect. I know, I said. Thank you. He started to leave, then turned back. I'm putting together a research consortium. 12 institutions. We're looking at long-term outcomes in ventricular tachycardia ablation. I'd like you to consider being part of it. I'll have my office reach out. I stood in that foyer for a moment after the door closed. I could hear Gwendolyn in the next room, her voice finding its way back to its usual register, the conversation folding back around the shape of the evening like water around a stone. I thought about Doris, the 64-year-old woman I'd been with that afternoon, whose heart had been misfiring in a way 2 other doctors had missed. I thought about the look on her face when I told her we'd found it, when I told her we could fix it. I thought about the feeling of knowing exactly what you are and what you can do, even in rooms that can't see it. Gwendolyn called the next morning. She called early, which told me something. She'd been awake with it. Last night was lovely, she said. Conrad seemed very engaged. He did, I agreed. A pause. I didn't realize Preston never mentioned the symposium. There are a lot of things Preston doesn't mention. Another pause. Longer this time. I may have been imprecise in how I described your work. Imprecise. I turned the word over. Imprecise was what you were when you misspoke a date or cited the wrong statistic. What Gwendolyn had done was something more deliberate than imprecise. But she was 71, and she was trying, in the limited way that she could, and I had spent 9 years learning the difference between what was worth fighting for and what was worth letting be. I appreciate that, I said. The work you're doing, she said. It sounds significant. It is, I said. It's very significant. She didn't apologize. Not really. Not in the way that would have meant something. But she said significant like she meant it, and for Gwendolyn Calloway, that was a kind of territory she hadn't ceded before. I joined Dr. Ashby's research consortium 4 months later. 12 institutions, 200 patients, 3 years of follow-up data that we're still in the middle of collecting. My name is listed first on the preliminary publication, which Preston mentioned at dinner one night with something in his voice that I think was pride, and which Gwendolyn mentioned to one of her foundation board members shortly after as though she had always known. I didn't correct her. I'm past needing the correction. What I am is a physician. I have been a physician for 11 years. I have worked in rooms that didn't see me, sat at tables that placed me at the far end, smiled through introductions that scraped off a decade of training and handed back a smaller version of myself. And I have learned this. The work doesn't need the room to believe in it. The work is real whether the room sees it or not. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't something. Some small, stubborn, very human part of me that exhaled that night when Conrad Ashby set down his fork. That noticed the way Gwendolyn's smile went still. That thought quietly, finally, now you know.